Hello. This video is going to discuss an issue that people sometimes struggle with, printing gray tones in a relief medium like Linocut with only black ink and with only one block. Usually shading and shadow in most relief media is done with hatching and cross-hatching, fine lining, speckling, and so forth, all intended to imply a shade less than black by simply reducing the amount of absolute black. What I'm going to do is show you how I do shadows and lesser than black areas that will look like a natural gray tone without texturing and without using gray ink. I'll show you this done on ABS plastic engraving sheets, but it should work just as well on lino. When I set out to achieve this, I decided it had to be entirely repeatable. In other words, editionable. In relief print edition, every unit needs to be as identical as possible to the others. And before I get into the process, let's go through the principle that makes it work. That way it's going to be a lot easier to understand when you see it. The fundamental principle is that two inked surfaces come into contact, and they will transfer ink when one or the other has more or less ink. Two surfaces with similar characteristics, in other words, the same material, and with the same amount of ink applied will not exchange ink. This is the principle that allows you to remove excess ink from a block by rolling it with a barely inked brayer. For most of the rest of this video, I'm going to set the camera up so you'll be looking at me on the work surface, pointing out things on the block, the masks, and the print. Just watching me talk is not very instructive. So let me set up the camera again so you can see what we're talking about. Here we have a fully inked block. But there are areas we want to print somewhere in the middle of the grayscale. This could be to depict a shadowed area, or just one or another area that for some technical reason needs less ink. I initially tried selectively inking portions of the block using a brayer that had part of its load rolled off onto newsprint, but inking a particular area with that brayer while avoiding getting ink in it from a normally inked loaded brayer was difficult. And when the clean brayer intruded into an area I wanted to stay black, it removed ink. After some thought, it occurred to me that taking the ink off was similar to putting less ink on. Now let's look at this carved block. It's ABS plastic, a little larger than I normally work in, where we want to create shadows. Shadows here mean just places with less than the full direct light on the back side, away from the light source. So part of the desk below the windows down here in this corner, you don't see it here, and I'll explain why you don't see all of the detail on this print. Needless to say, the piece of furniture, there's a desk down here that needs shadow to show its form and detail. Now there's also a piece of furniture over here at the foot of this bed. It has a spray of direct light across it, but the rest of it needs to be shadowed. Down here on the side of the bed is another such area that needs to be shadowed, not dead black. Now, up here in the center, it depicts a mirror, and that mirror is reflecting the opposite walls. I did not want them to be just dead black, and I certainly didn't want them to be dead white. So I wanted them to appear toned down to gray, to be a little more interesting and maybe a little more realistic and make a little more visual sense. So what I hit up on was the use of a mask. Now, by a mask, I mean a piece of Duralar plastic. Duralar is a thin, matte finish plastic. It's easily cut with a craft knife. I cut it with an ultrasonic cutter, which is very, very easy. Now, this mask, and I will lie over the area we're interested in, and it will align with it. You can see through to that white surface on the top of that piece of furniture. That won't matter. I outlined the figures on the Duralar and then cut it out. I have another video that goes into more depth in the ultrasonic cutter. But suffice it to say, it cuts slicker than a craft knife. You don't have to use a mask the full size of the block. You just need enough to expose the area you want to change and leave room for the brayer to stay on the mask. If the brayer runs off the mask, it will strip ink from the area you don't want it stripped, where you want the ink to remain. It's easiest if you make sure the mask reaches at least one edge, and preferably two, of the block. That makes it very easy to put precisely in place. So here's the block with one mask. This is the mask for the end of the bed and these pieces of furniture. This is another mask, which also conveniently abuts two edges of the block, and this exposes wall and a desk at the below those windows. Now you'll notice the thin uncut areas in both these masks. Those are places I want the full black ink to remain. I don't want the brayer picking up ink out of those areas. There's one more mask. This one addresses the images in a mirror. I wanted those images of the opposing wall. I didn't want them dead black, and I didn't want them white. I wanted them toned down to a gray to make them more interesting and make a little more visual sense. So the mask has to protect areas, like the woodwork, in and around the mirror, that you don't want to affect, that you want to remain black. Areas that are white don't matter. You don't have to account for them. They will never be inked anyway. Whether they're inside or outside of a cut area of the mask doesn't matter, so long as you don't press the mask down over a white area, everything is going to be fine. It's easiest to place the mask after you've inked at least one edge of it on the edge of the block. Now, the principle here that we talked about earlier of a surface with less ink will pick up ink, surface with more ink will transfer ink, was now working against me. I had masks with openings that exactly matched the areas I wanted where I wanted less ink. I inked the whole block in the usual way. Now, if I place the masks on it just as it is, the intact part of those masks, since they don't have ink, they will take ink from any area under that mask. Whether I use a brayer or not, it's going to remove ink when I roll that across. It's not ink I want to remove. The solution was to ink the back of the mask. These have been cleaned. So I ink those masks to the same standard as I would ink a block. I ink up a brayer in the normal way and roll it out across the mask, exactly like you would to a block that you were going to print. Now, this inevitably gets a little messy because you're going to be handling a mask that's fully inked on one side and has some ink being picked up on the front side. I do my mask inking in a large tray over newsprint. That way I can ink up the mask ahead of time. I can set that whole tray aside while I do the normal inking of the block, and then I can return to the tray for my reduction masks. Now, I want to point out, you should not have to re-ink the back of the mask for the next impression. It's not going to transfer ink because it's fully inked, and the block will be fully inked each time you apply it. So it should not have to be re-inked. But I got to say, you do need to be using oil-based ink, which you should be anyway. This is the one time that water-based ink is even worse than it usually is. You need the ink on the mask to be as fresh as the ink on the blocks, so there's no differential and no transfer. I then prepare a brayer sufficiently wide, and we'll do this with one of these masks. We'll prepare a brayer, and this is after the block is inked. We'll prepare a brayer by having the same amount of ink on the slab as normal, rolling out the brayer just as if we were going to ink the plate in the normal way, and then I roll most of the ink off. Note, this brayer is wide enough, it covers both of those cut areas, but it's narrow enough that I can keep it within that mask. If you are doing it this way consistently each time, inking the brayer, rolling a certain amount off on the newsprint, you'll be able to watch how that ink looks on the newsprint as it comes off and see to what degree it removed ink. You want this to be consistent, print to print to print, because that will make your grays consistent with each print. So if I begin with the brayer fully inked, that's a repeatable condition. I can do that again. I know I can do that again, and it'll be the same as the last time. The number and the distance of the rolls on the newsprint can be controlled and remembered. You can do this because you can see it coming off. And you just count the number of roll-offs and the number of ink removals. The goal is to make repeatable passes. You cannot really see the effect on the block as you're working. One or maybe two passes is enough for create most shadows using a mostly clean brayer. The brayer, having less ink, will pick up ink from those previously fully inked areas that are exposed by the mask. After any pass to remove ink, I then go back to the newsprint and I roll that brayer back to the condition it was before I made my first removal pass. That also is a repeatable condition. If I decide I'm going to make a second removal pass, I want to do it with the same degree of cleanliness of the brayer. If you control all those, every print you do will be the same. You want, when you roll this off, it's just like when you're picking up ink or you're inking a block. You want to make sure that you make at least a full rotation. You can calculate that from the diameter of the brayer roller. There are circumference calculators online that you can use if you want. Just know that an 1.5 inch brayer needs about 5 inches for a complete rollout. So when I'm cleaning it, I want to roll it out at least 5 inches to remove ink. Now, looking at the block again. The places that have less sun, the places I want to be shadowed, um, are the places that appear through the holes in the masks. It takes a little experience to judge the effect as you're working, but it's often not very critical. Since any degree, clear degree of the black being toned down to gray will look pretty natural. A gray fabric in the case of a suit, or a shadow in another case. If it's not going to remove anything like all the ink, you're not going to get all the ink up. You're still going to have gray. Now, let's look at what that did. This is a proof only. So this is something of a work in progress. Okay, here is a print from that block. And I'll be ready to add for you some, to make it more clear. And remember, these are reversed, of course, so I have to turn the mask upside down to show you on the print. But here you can see the areas where ink was removed by this mask. The other areas work the same way. This is the resulting print. You can see the result here at the end of this bed, here on this piece of furniture at the foot of the bed, here in the windows reflecting the opposite wall, and here in parts of wall and this is the furniture under the window. Here's by the bed. So pieces of wall, pieces of furniture that have gone to gray. As I said, you don't have to worry about what is already cut down to white. If that is within the cut area of the mask, it's not going to matter. It's going to be below the brayer. If it's in an uncut area of the mask, it's not going to matter. The mask is not pressing down, so you don't want to press down. If I have the mask where it intrudes on some of these white areas, I don't want to press down on it, or I will foul those background areas. To further demonstrate, I'm going to show you a work in progress and a mask that's been prepared for it. This is an ABS plastic block. Nearly finished carving it. I've got some more work to do deepening some of the white areas and that sort of thing. But here I wanted the walls back here, this wall, this wall, this wall, the front of this table to be in shadow. So this mask has those areas cut away, and areas I want to remain black like this are left intact. Now, this white, this white, this white will not matter. They are, the brayer, when I remove the ink, won't affect those. I'm going to have to go to I'm going to have to carefully use the brayer in this case, because I can cover most of these areas, so I'm probably going to have to go to a larger brayer, or I'm going to have to use it very selectively in order not to pass over an open area twice. If I pass over it twice, I'm going to see a line where it's removed more or less ink. In fact, in creating the shadow, the brayer can have its new ink that it picked up from the block when you removed the first pass. You clean it a second time, it's back to the same condition. Another pass will remove a similar amount of ink. So the number of passes, each pass gets lighter and lighter in tone. If you go too far, you can ink that brayer back up in the normal way. With the mask still in place, you can apply fresh ink to that area you removed ink from, and you're back at the beginning. You clean the brayer, start taking ink off of it. That's a good idea to do set up your own procedural standards, Make a mask the same size as a piece of lino, cut 3 bands out of it. Use each band as a different variation in the way you roll and clean and how many passes, so you can see the effects. And take notes, remember what you did. For each project, you clean and preserve the masks and keep them with the block. I often do not clean a mask, I just roll it off onto to newsprint. But I do clean the mask because that ink is going to dry and they're flexible. I don't want it flaking. I want to start clean every time to make it repeatable for every element in the edition. Now, my examples here have all been ABS plastic engraving blocks. The principle should apply to lino and any other block material that's being relief printed. Give this a try. See if you like that effect. If you've been looking for a way to do grays, this might be it.